Welcome back, I'm Kim Bailey and this is Floral Art Online. Today I'm bringing you a review of a demonstration that I did reasonably recently, and unfortunately the technology let me down. While I was actually doing the demonstration, I did have the video camera on, I did have a microphone on, and whilst the video recorded some of it, the microphone didn't record any of it, and then when I looked at the video it wasn't really good enough to use, and so I tried to recreate the demonstration back here at home. And so what I found then was that I didn't have the camera in the right place and I didn't have the microphone attached sufficiently for it to pick up the audio. So it's a bit of a mismatch of a demonstration, but it does give you an idea of some of the things that I've been doing. These are designs that I did for this demonstration. Was a 6-monthly review of the work that I've been doing in workshops for U3A locally here. So that's University of the Third Age for people who aren't familiar with it. It's designed for people who are over 65 who are interested in learning something new. And so this 12 months for 2025, 4 terms of 6 and 8 weeks each. And the idea, my idea, is that by the end of the time, people will have a basic understanding of techniques and of floral design, so that they can use things from their garden or gifts they're given, or buy flowers and make things that they enjoy doing, that are pieces of art more so than just flower arrangements. And so that's the basis of floral art. For this demonstration, this was their 6-monthly review, so they've done 2 terms. Predominantly, they have absolutely no experience in anything to do with arranging flowers when they first start. So they've had some time to learn a few techniques as we go. Each week we do a technique and a design, so they have something to take home with them and have a look at. And increasingly they're becoming very competitive, shall we say, in terms of making sure that they finish their design on the day, or if they don't, they'll bring it the following week, or they'll send me photos to say that they've finished it. And that's encouraging for me to feel that they have taken on this idea and they're enjoying it. So let's go to the demonstration now. There are 5 designs, as I said. The one was a taster for what we're going to be doing next term, and the others were a review of topics or of techniques that we have looked at. So we'll work through them and hopefully it will give you some inspiration as well. This first design is the teaser for next term. It is about using wax in designs. So here we have a frame from a charity store, naturally enough, and it's got a cardboard backing. That's fairly important in terms of making sure that the wax material sticks to the backing board. What we want to do is use this frame as the framework, as the structure for our design. So that the method is really very simple, and I've tested it a number of times with all sorts of different paper-based materials, but this one particularly is made with toilet paper that is soaked in the wax. Now that's the back of it, so you can see how the wet wax has melted through the design. The method is simply to dip the sections of toilet paper into wax very quickly, because it will soak up a lot, and that was the problem with some of the other things, like tissues or serviettes or paper towels, those sorts of things, is they soak up too much of the wax for you to get to layer the design. So it's not about getting one bit of wax soaked material and putting it onto the frame, it's layering it. So the method is to dip it in the wax, throw it onto the backing board, and then build up that layer. What I've done there is, once it's been dried, is I've pushed some holes into it to give me the opportunity to put some paper covered wire, some bind wire in, so that's where I'm going to do my placements of my plant material. Now, in terms of the plant material, obviously you could use dried material and then it would be in place forever, basically, but I'm going to use fresh material, and I'm going to utilised some long-lasting fresh material. It had been soaking for a long time, so it was well and truly hydrated. But what you can do also when you're using this technique, if you've got a thick fleshy stem that is very much hydrated in terms of the flower, you can dip it very quickly into the wax and that will seal the end of the stem, and you don't need any other water source for this particular design method. You could use serviettes. We did an exercise in this group of using paper serviettes that were patterned, and we made a collage using those as a backing for the rest of the design that we did. So you could do that, and then I would suggest that you have to colour the frame so that it all matches together. But what we want to have is a design that can be placed in all sorts of different ways. You'll see at the end of it that we can do it in vertically or horizontally. There are 4 different ways that you can actually display it. If you were putting it on a wall, you might have a particular way that you want the design to sit. But for this exercise, I had just a stand behind the frame so that it would lean up against it while I was putting the plant material in. So here we have the plant material that I'm going to use. This is ornamental kale. So from the cabbage family, comes in the purple and green or a white and green. I chose the purple because I wanted it to really stand out. I wanted it to be the feature. I could have used the green and white, but it would have been a much softer design. I wanted something pretty vibrant as the design. And so what we need to then think about is how will that sit in the design. What I've picked out there, first of all, is the largest of the blooms because I want the heavier weight where there's a single placement at the base or the bottom of this design. What I also want to ensure is that I don't limit the placements by the frame itself. So I've come, as you can see, outside of the frame for this placement so that the plant material is the focal point. It's not that there's this thing inside the frame, but that the plant material is where your eye is drawn. So it's just a matter of slipping it through the bind wire that was there and tying it off at the back to hold it in place. You can see that the stem end also extends past the frame so that the main feature of the design is the plant material. And then we have to look at our other 2 pieces of plant material that I'm using and see where they should be placed and how they should be placed. Now obviously I could go all in the same line, so I have the flower heads all at one end. I could alternate them. I could have this heavier large one down at the base and then the 2 higher up in the frame or on the frame in the other direction. Now we'll place the second one, and I've decided that I will have the heads facing the opposite way to the base one. And so this is a matter of just putting once again the stem through the bind wire that's there without letting the whole thing collapse in front of it, and then tying it off at the back. So what I've got there are loops of the bind wire that just need to be tied through, and what I'm pointing at there is that there are some leaves, some of the foliage that is just at the edge of where the wire is, and so I could trim that off, but we still want to have it reflecting and repeating what is in the other placements. So I don't want to take off too many of those leaves because we've got some clearly on the base and will be on the second piece that I put in, or the third piece that I put in fact, second piece for the top. Now this one has the head just over the edge of the frame, but it doesn't have the stem over the edge of the frame. You don't have to have them all exactly the same because that then has the opportunity to make the design a little bit more static. So what we're looking at now is where to place that second one. How far down will I do it? Which direction will I do it? And I was actually asking the class at that stage which direction they preferred it, and they actually liked it with the just below the top placement. And that's good because what is happening is that they're actually looking at what suits their eye most. How does their eye travel through that design? Because we've got some very heavy, very dominant plant material. We don't want it to look like it's all just spot placements. We want to be able to travel through this work of art and see everything there and be intrigued by it and go inside it. So you can see that the stem on that one actually is inside the frame, so we've made that a little bit different to the others. Once again, it creates a little bit of contrast and a little bit of tension within the design. What we have got there is space in the design, space between the stems, some very dominant lines. When you're looking at it now, you could think about what to do with that the outside frame itself, and whether you would colour that in or whether you would leave it as it is. That's up to you, a personal choice. But that's the finished design for this particular contemporary design that looks at using wax. And you can see now how I'm showing you how you can have it in any direction. Doesn't look as good, I will say, with the heavy one at the top. I like the heavy one at the bottom, and I think I probably like it where it's got the two upright and the heavier one facing down if we had it in the vertical sense. But it gives you an opportunity to play with the plant material, to have a think about using a minimal amount of plant material in a design and making it pleasing to the eye, interesting for people to look at and look through and see how you've done it and what's actually in it. But it makes a statement, so it is a piece of art in that sense, but it's a floral art piece. The second design was using a cut glass vase, which was something that pretty much everyone had at home that they didn't know how to use, and we talked very early on in the workshops about looking at a vase's shape and making sure that the flowers or the material that you put outside of the vase follows the shape of the vase. But if you didn't want to do that, if you wanted to cut down, particularly with a glass vase, which is shiny and attracts attention more so than the flowers, if you wanted to break up that surface, then one of the things that I suggested to do was to use the wreath shapes that we made in one of the early workshops. So these were made out of willow, and it's just a very simple twist into a circle of the willow branch, the defoliated willow branch. And I've put the first one down onto the vase, and the second one I'm going to use at the top of the vase. The issue with using it at the top of the vase was that it would give me some sense of a collar almost for the material that I was placing at the top of the vase. You could also, with a vase like this, use the grid system with the sticky tape. So put a sticky tape grid across the top so you can put your placement in. Not suggesting that you put anything other than water inside the vase because it detracts from the overall look. So some suggestions would be to put in scrunched up wire, decorative wire, or some other filler. The other thing you can do to enhance the design is not just have the vase on its own, have something that is complementary and smaller, that you have one or two flowers in that reflect what's in the larger vase. The issue then again is that these are two separate entities, so what can you do to bring it all together? And the simple solution is to have them sitting on a base that is complementary. And so I've got a glass plate that they're going to sit on. And what that does is refine the design so that you're seeing the design as a whole, not just as all these separate entities that are placed one beside the other or one on top of the other. So now what we're going to do is utilise the smaller of the vases just with a tiny bit of foliage to break up the flower placement that I'm going to do, and that will be reflected, the foliage that I'm using will obviously be reflected in the larger vase. Now I've got a camellia that's lost its stem, so what we can do to have it sit in this vase and actually take up some water is a bamboo skewer. And the first time I put it in, put the skewer straight through the hole where the stalk was. So I've cut it down now into the right depth for the vase, and I'll thread it across the base of the flower so that the water's going to be taken up through that bamboo skewer into the flower, and it'll just give it a little bit longer life. And that's something you can do with quite a number of smaller flowers that are difficult to place in designs, things like frangipani, ideal for that. And there we have, that's the placement. That's all we need in that particular vase, because the bigger flowers, the camellia flowers, are going to be reflected in the taller arrangement. Now we're going to do the placements in the tall vase. So we've got the same foliage that we used in the smaller vase, just placing it at the back in a fan shape, just to give me some structure ready to put into the rest of the plant material. And what I'm showing you there is that the shape of that foliage follows the line of the vase, so it brings our eye out through the top of the vase. And then we've got some chrysanthemums to add in, good long stems, don't need to cut the individual flowers off, and they're just going to be our sort of secondary focal, I guess, because the camellia flowers, obviously because of their size and their colour, are going to be the main focal point when they go in. So I'll just continue to do the placements so that you can see what I'm doing and where I'm placing them. This is the flowers from a carrot that was left to go to seed that I picked up at the farm. I thought it was Queen Anne's lace when I first saw it, and said to my dad, I'll just go and pick the Queen Anne's lace, and he said it's not Queen Anne's lace, it's carrot that he forgot that was in the ground. So they're a great little transition flower, and quite long lasting, so they will go into the design just to give us a transitioning place between the camellias and the chrysanthemums. And then we have our finished design. The next two designs are based on using candelabra, on repurposing candelabra. This first one, very narrow candelabra, so what I've got to think about is the depth in the design. What I've done is covered the arms with wool, two with the black texture wool and two with the red wool, and then I have placed some swordgrass across using the arms of the candelabra to weave the swordgrass horizontally, and that breaks that very vertical line that it has, but it also gives me an opportunity to place some plant material in the design, hiding the candelabra stand, but also following the movement of that creates. And there's not a lot else that needs to be done with the design. Keeping it simple and keeping the nice clear lines is what I like in a design. The Banksia foliage that I've used there gives it a little bit more, gives it another form without it being detracting too much from the actual arrangement itself. I've also got some autumn leaves in there, some Acer Parmentum, so they've just turned the leaves and you can see them through, and that brings the red of the candlesticks out onto the design itself. So what I'm doing now is just placing some Banksia flowers that are past their prime, so that they're a little bit softer to use, and they're just placed in the top, because otherwise if we don't have anything in the top it looks like a very hard edge, a straight edge. So we need something there that is going to create a little bit of interest, a little bit more height, another texture to put in the design. Still need something to finish it off, and it doesn't always have to be flowers. So what I've done in this case is I've got some mini capsicums, and I've actually placed them on pieces of swordgrass, but you could use skewers or anything else that's going to, toothpicks that's going to hold them there. What it does is repeat the colour, changes the form a little bit, gives us a sort of a humorous hint of the fact that there might be flame there if it was actually a candle, but it gives the arrangement a little bit of whimsy and a bit more life, and there's dynamic movement within the design, and we still feel like there's depth because of that horizontal placement of the swordgrass. We've got placement in the back and the front of the candlestick, so I've got a little bit of room to move in that design. And that's simply all that I did for that particular design. So this is the second of our designs with using candelabra. In this one I wanted to completely obliterate the candelabra, just use it ostensibly as the structure. So it's a waveform that's got sections for tea lights in the middle of it, and I also didn't want to use the tea light placements because they're very uniform. I wanted it to be a little bit more organic in its presentation. The other thing that I have used there is in one of the workshops we made duck feet out of wires, and so I've actually attached those to some branches, and that's to give me a little bit more depth and width in the design, a little bit more movement in the design, as well as cover up some of that base itself. And they're just bound to the wavy section of the candelabra using the bind wire, paper covered wire. And then I have attached some foliage as well separately to the branches themselves. I've also got a couple of sticks there that use the spider webbing technique to hold some vials, some water vials for the placement of the actual flowers that are going to go into this design. And in three of the areas where there is room for the tea lights, I've actually put string jute covered vials and test tubes to place the flowers. So I will speed up the placement of the flowers. I've used jonquils early year for this design because they're a good solid flower bunch on the one stem, and I can fit them easily into the tubes, and it means that you can replace them. I didn't want too big a flower because I wanted the design to be an overall look rather than big flower placements that made it difficult for you to enjoy the whole of the design. So that's one of the things that you need to think about with your designs, is the plant material and whether that relates to the structure that you're using. So there is our finished design using candelabra as a structure and completely covering it with the plant material. The final design in the demonstration was about the workshop where we looked at utilising bark or featuring bark, and the participants always get a pack for each workshop, and this is a lovely piece of old bark. They didn't get anything this size, they got two different kinds of bark. This is one that I have used vertically, and I can use it with a metal stand behind it and then have the flowers draping over it, but I thought this time I would use it horizontally. I do still have a pot that I'm going to use for some water retaining material for behind the bark. And this is perlite. Now I have another video where I've talked to you about using perlite instead of floral foam. It's reusable, it's sustainable in that once you're tired of it you can use it in the garden. It forms part of what we would buy as potting mix, so it's a water retaining material. You do need to be careful when you're using it about making sure that you've got dust protection on, because it does have a very fine dust that gets everywhere and into your lungs particularly. So you need to be careful using it, but it is a very useful material and it's solid. So the placements that you put in there will stay in place as they do with floral foam. So the piece of bark is resting on that, so that I've got the opening in that centre piece there where I can put anything that needs water. For the most part, this is very much a signature piece of mine, using Australian natives and making sure that they are placed in almost natural ways, so that it just looks like you'd wandered through the bush. And this is the branch, nice long horizontal branch. It's got some spent Banksia flowers on it, so just the cobs of the flowers, now the seed pods of the flowers. And this is going to be anchored in one of the areas of the bark that's got a little crack in it. The bark itself is getting a little bit fragile now, so I'm a little bit careful about doing the placements and making sure that they're secure enough. But this is one of the beauties of using this piece of bark, is that it does have lots of holes and nooks and crannies that I can wedge things into. I did have some difficulty getting this to stay in place for this particular arrangement. But then it was a matter of just adding in the other pieces of Banksia that I had to make sure that the design itself flowed from one side to the other. There was depth, so that there was interest. You could look down and into it and through it, and it utilised natural colours that would enhance the piece of bark that was there, because the workshop that we did was about featuring bark, so bark had to be the focal point, not the flowers. And in this instance, it's not only is it the focal point, but it is also the support for the rest of the design. So let's speed up the tape so you can see how the placements went. The finishing touch for this design was to cover up that perlite that's in the pot at the back. And so I've got some Tillandsia, some old man's beard, and I'm just going to pack that in over the top of the perlite. The beauty of the Tillandsia is that it is the same form and colour as is in the rest of the design. So there we have our featuring bark design. Thank you for joining me on this review of the 5 designs that I did as the demonstration pieces for U3A in early July of 2025. Looking back on the designs and the workshops that we had completed in the first half of the year, I look forward to being able to bring you a review of the second half of the year. And for all of my participants who are watching this video, very shortly we'll be back in the classroom doing designs and exploring our creativity. Thanks for joining me. I'm Kim Bailey and this is Floral Art Online.